Welcome to this special show from Windows on the World. Over the past few years, I've been doing a lot of research into history and the steering of popular culture, as well as the steering of ancient and modern history. And I've been in touch with Ingrid Mclean from Resonancebookworks.com. We've had many interesting conversations, and we've also done a few videos. One is a film trailer called Britain's Shattered Isles. And we're going to be talking a bit about that later in this initial broadcast, all about hidden history and the steering of humanity. So we're going to be talking today, particularly about the steering of social movements, especially the 1960s, and how this relates into the social engineering of the present time. So my guest today is Ingrid Mclean of Resonancebookworks.com. And also, do remember that you can subscribe to us on Spreaker. We have community strikes on YouTube, and we could easily lose that channel. So please subscribe to us on Spreaker at windowsontheworld.net, which is where all of our Sunday shows originate. All of our archive from YouTube and everything we've ever done is now on Odyssey, and the link is on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. And there you will have access to all of our shows, which include material which has led up to where we are today. So I'm going to introduce Ingrid Mclean of Resonancebookworks.com. Hi, Ingrid.
Hiya.
Hi. So first of all, tell us a bit about Resonancebookworks.com. We met several years ago now. It must be getting on for nearly 10 years ago, I think. And we've worked on a couple of projects. Yeah, so tell us a bit about Resonance Bookworks.
We started in 2008. Yeah, I met you at the first event we went to with the books. It was AV4 at Heathrow.
Yeah, long time ago now.
Yeah. We started when I self-published a book that I wrote about some weird and quite scary spiritual experiences that we had when we lost someone close. It opened up a whole new world of spirit and different things and different way of thinking about things, turned the world upside down, made it completely different to how it was before, and got me into trouble with some in my family who couldn't deal with it. So I withdrew that book. We kept on the publishing, though, and started to do new editions of out-of-print books, like David Lindsay, J.W. Dunn, Hermetic books. Then I got into the history of Edinburgh after a message from my granddad in spirit. He was a Scottish Mason. That's how I discovered Commons Beaumont. So we correlated stories, dates, and places, and he concluded, dun, 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 that it all happened here. There was a catastrophe in the north, and he did massive amounts of research on comets and weather connections. And in about 3,500 years ago now, a great landmass was sunk by the impact of a comet. A huge advanced civilization was destroyed, like they have been many times in the past and like they will be many times again. And Britain, as we know it now, was broken off from the large continent. And this piece of planet, this comet, landed on, became Staffa, if you know a Staffa now, with Fingal's Cave. Velikovsky, by the way, nicked his ideas. But he was Jewish, and he did leave the history of the Jews where we commonly believe it to be. And, well, that attitude's accepted by most people, isn't it? Like 99.9999% of people believe that, at least because that's where the Emperor Constantine put it. For short-term political purposes at the time, keeping his ass covered, making sure the empire was all right. It was better if his headquarters was over there rather than over here, because he actually came from York, and it was around the time when the empire was falling to pieces.
Yeah,
he was trying desperately to keep it together, so his new capital was Constantinople, and it was very, very helpful for the Romans if all the history was moved over to there. So then what he did was assembled a meeting, the Council of Nicaea, and got lots and lots of church people to join together and agree on a world religion, rather like nowadays, a whole control system for the planet, so that they could keep control through religion. So they devised Jesus, who was an amalgamation of a rebel in Scotland and the various cometry deities, basically. So they had a Messiah. They attached lots of stories to him, which were stories from older periods of religion. And those stories were actually about the cometry impact, when people became afraid of the sky gods. So he was compiled, this Jesus that they worship was a joined up amalgamation of various sky gods, well, basically pieces of comet, and the Scottish rebel.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be quite hard to follow for some people, I think, because this is the problem I had with it to start with, that when you start looking into this stuff, it in the beginning, to most people, it sounds preposterous, but when you start thinking about it, it starts to make sense. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, really, isn't it? I mean, the information
we can
you
go
gave,
into
yes.
it. Yeah, we can go into it more in another program, but
absolutely, yeah.
But when you obviously would have to, because it's really hard to explain. I mean,
Yes.
I know when I first read it, it just completely blew my mind. Right, I could not believe that anybody could think this and write it down. And as you said, it's very hard to read. But like, I've got to stick up for Commons Beaumont, because not only is it hard to read, but it's bloody hard to write, because it's hard to write something like that because you've got no reference points. You've got nothing to go back from.
No, and that's what I was constantly. This is what.
And then you end up putting everything in it, and it's really difficult to boil it down to something simple. I mean, I've been trying to boil down Commons Beaumont's work since I started doing this in 2008. And you've tried to get me to do it, and it's really, really, really hard to simplify it, because there's so much. It just spreads everywhere all over the world.
I think what's funny about it is we've almost fallen out at times, but we always keep saying,
many times over there.
It's like, but we're so interested in it that we want to keep doing it. When you get a nose for this kind of stuff, it starts to lead you into really questioning a lot more. And what I've found really interesting about what you're doing is that, one, it's hard to prove, but two, it's hard to disprove. So you're left with an area which is impossible in some ways to research because it's been erased. And if something's been erased, then that makes it very fascinating. And I can say from my own experiences of research that a lot of history has definitely been erased. And that's just from the stuff I've looked into. Yeah. So carry on. Sorry, let's carry on.
Right. It's hard to prove in a conventional scientific way. And as you say, it's hard to disprove too. But it's encoded into every single thing. It's encoded in the language. It's encoded in buildings. It's encoded in place names. It's everywhere. I can't go into it too deeply now, but we will. But it's all there. And the civilization that we have now is based on the fact that it's there. And the people who are in charge of the civilization that we have now know all this. Masonry is based on that. Government's based on that. The Queen's based on that. Everyone who is in the know is in the know about this. Everyone knows.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And Glastonbury.
Yes.
And York.
Yeah. So, yeah, if we can maybe go into the main kind of ideas of Commons Beaumont, we've got this idea of the cometry impact, which doesn't actually coincide with what I've looked at as the recorded impacts. I think it was like 3,400 years ago. Is that right? Can you take us through that? Because this is a part of the story that I found quite problematic, because I know that there was a massive comet about 1,500 years ago. That's all recorded. But as far as an extinction event goes, tell us about this theory that Comyns Beaumont had.
Well, he says that it's all written in the Old Testament. And the Old Testament is the story of the Jews, Druids, you know, those words that blend together, and that they were here, and that he concluded that the stories took place here because it's the only way that the stories make sense. If you try to place them in the Middle East, it doesn't work. There's one simple story about people getting fish from Joppa. It's absolutely miles and miles and miles away across a desert, right? But when you transpose all the locations to where he says they ought to be, then it is but 10 minutes up the road. And there is actually a place called Joppa in Scotland. And some of the place names are just ridiculously similar. And there's no way it's coincidence. And the stories, I mean, many stories of the Old Testament, which I am not going into now because it'll take far too long and it's far too complicated, and I need to refer to notes to do it because, like you say, it's really hard to read, it's really hard to explain, and so it needs a whole thing of its own. But for the time being, if you just accept, right, that things weren't there, they were here, and there are things that there are ways of showing that. And it is encoded in the landscape. It's encoded in buildings, the layout of cities, the way stories in the Bible relate to certain places to other places. It just simply is the truth. And I'm sorry, but it just simply is the truth. And that's the conclusion you come to after a while. And then the world starts to make sense. It starts to make sense in a way that it just didn't before. So you've got to sort of turn your whole mind upside down in order to get this idea. And once this idea has been grasped, so many things make sense. So many things. And the people in charge of the world are really, really dedicated to keeping this quiet.
You've done a lot of work on the 60s, and we did a trailer for a book that you wrote called Behind Open Doors, about the way that the 60s was steered with regards to the swinging 60s, flower power, and the great big revolution, which was a steered revolution. Maybe we should go into that now and how you got into that in the first place, because you've met some really fascinating characters from the 60s. And of course, a lot of them are dying off now, aren't they?
They are, yeah. 3 of them have died while I was writing the book. Yeah, it was quite sad, really. And as I say, it did start because I was interested in what happened to Paul McCartney in 1966, like lots of people are, but you're not supposed to say it. Like, remember me and Nick Colostrum at your house that time when I suggested that Paul McCartney might not be himself, and everyone laughed at me. Anyway, good. I've got 1,000 pages on that, and I'm busy editing it down because I'd like to put it out in June. But while I was researching that, anyway, that's how I got interested into the 1960s stuff, because I started talking to Nigel Gordon somehow through a friend of a friend of a friend, and he told me, because he liked to talk about himself, sadly he went before all of this got really exciting, but we did get his book out. He had an autobiography which he'd half finished. He said that someone had offered to finish it for him, but they hadn't come through. So I said, well, would you like me to have a look at it? And I offered, not least because I wanted to get as much Beatles information as I could from Nigel and some of his friends, because he had some quite influential friends in the 1960s.
Could we
So
actually go
while I
into? Sorry, my mic was muted. I was
yeah,
just going to bring in a point there. Could you actually tell us who Nigel Gordon was? Because obviously the listeners probably don't know.
oh, but they should. He was the acid messiah of 101 Cromwell Road. When LSD came over here, through Michael's Hollingshead and John Beresford, it got passed around in London. John Esam, the poet, was selling it, handing it out. Nigel was from Cambridge. He and his wife were sort of basically the beautiful people. They were a lovely couple and very popular. And they knew everyone. They'd come up from Cambridge, got this place, got this big house in Cromwell Road in Kensington, where everybody went. And Nigel got his hands on the LSD and started passing it out to his friends. He knew Donovan, Gypsy Dave, Christopher Gibbs, Marianne Faithfull, John Dunbar, Mick Jagger, all the Stones, all the Beatles, Robert Fraser, Joe Mellon, Michael Hollingshead. He didn't know Michael Hollingshead, but he knew friends of his. The people at Granny Texas Trip, Nigel Weymouth, John Pierce, Stashed a Roller, Mick Jagger's friend, and Dan Richter from 2001. So I've spoken to all those people about it, trying to get their little secrets out of them, but none of them gives them up. They'll start talking, and then as soon as you get anywhere near what they don't want you to know, like with the secrets of the entire universe and the world, they'll just shut up and start talking about something else. It's really, really frustrating. But anyway, I was looking at the LSD and wondering how on earth this stuff started and why people started. Sorry, I better have a drink. Why people started eating mushrooms and thinking they knew everything. And I found basically it went directly to the CIA, with Leary and Hollingshead and Aldous Huxley and William Burroughs and Yoko Ono and Jane Asher and Jane Asher's parents, all involved. I saw how the CIA was embedded in the British government at the time, how much sex and weirdness there was, how the controllers were controlled through paedophilia, how the 60s was planned after the war, how it mirrored what had happened before World War I when the kids had started waking up, because the kids always wake up, right? And then they've got to be sent off to war. The kids at the start of the century ended up being swept up by the Hitler Youth, like the kids now, swept up by Extinction Rebellion and the like. And it's not just theory either, because all of this planning is explained in great detail. Well, in the Rockefeller report in 2010, and another report called The Changing Images of Man by the Stanford Research Institute in 1982 by Willis Harman and Joseph Campbell, interestingly. Willis Harman was a CIA asset. In the 60s, they chose the hippie way, because they wanted change. It was time for change, because it was like post-industrialism and, starting to be technological. So they chose the hippie way of letting society collapse in a managed way, and they managed it with drugs. Huxley was pushing LSD, like selling it like Haagen-Dazs ice cream, giving it to samples to celebrities, and getting them to pass it on. And Cary Grant was great, advertising it to housewives, like pretending it was pushing consciousness expanding ideas, but really all they ended up was getting droves of deadheads. There's a picture here of Cary Grant and how he was then. Here's a quote from him, right? We're all unconsciously holding our anus. In one LSD dream, I shit all over the rug and I shit all over the floor. Another time, I imagined myself as a giant penis launching off from Earth like a spaceship. I seemed to be in a world of healthy, chubby little babies' legs in diapers, smeared blood, a sort of general menstrual activity taking place. He actually called Good Housekeeping magazine and told them this, right? He said, I want to tell the world about this. It's changed my life. Everyone's got to take it.
That's really interesting, because that just ties into kind of Freudian nonsense in a lot of ways, doesn't it? It's not
Well,
what
Freud,
anyone
yeah.
would call mind expanding. It's obviously a kind of really weird propaganda tool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Freud was part of this. I mean,
Mm.
Freud and his family, because his nephew was Adorno, and yeah, they all used to. There was a group. Well, I'll get onto that in a minute, because that's another interesting bit about what was happening before the First World War and how the mushrooms came about. But yeah, I mean, Life magazine was in on this too. There's a picture here of Bert Lahr, the Cowardly Lion of Oz, on the front of Life magazine, talking about and a strap line about the discovery of mushrooms that cause strange visions. Bert Lahr, who was also the actor and writer, and also the father of John Lahr, who took over Joe Orton's history, interestingly. We'll talk about that next time. Life magazine was sponsored by the CIA, supporting mushroom research. There was a guy called Gordon Was, who was funded by the CIA through JP Morgan to go and research mushrooms in various exotic places. He got money from Roger Heim at the French National History Museum too. And all of that stuff led on to Leary's research. Leary got interested in the stuff that Wasson was doing. Leary was involved with all the top people. He gave LSD to John F. Kennedy. He was very, very close to the influential and rich Mellon family. And he rented out their Millbrook mansion in New York for like no money at all, just because one of the family liked him. He was having an affair with the sister. So Michael Hollingshead, who brought it over here, he was there at Millbrook. The Brotherhood of Eternal Love gets involved. You have love-ins, you have festivals, you have the kids, you have a generation gap, you have the parents not knowing what the hell is going on, which leads to family breakdown, more power to the state. You have the deconstruction of religion, putting mushrooms in the place of previous religion. And there you go. Hang on a minute, I've got a quote here from Willis Harman. Willis Harman, who I mentioned before, was CIA and involved in the Changing Images of Man, the Stanford Research Institute study in 1982. Okay, but this is from an interview by Mark Stallman with Willis Harman. And he said, interestingly, the second generation of MK Ultra was primarily electronic. Computers became the next LSD. And the Frank Olson story is particularly useful. It was filmed as Wormwood, where he was thrown out of the window. Purportedly, he jumped out of the window because he'd taken LSD, but he was unhappy about the things that they were doing. He was unhappy about the CIA experiments. They threw him out. We should talk about that next time as well. There's quite a long section in the book, in the Behind Open Doors book about that. We will go into that, and I will find references and give them to you for finding documents.
That's great, because we've got a sort of free books page on Winners on the World, and a lot of people have been asking me about document references. When I do the Sunday shows, I put a lot of information in, and really, because I do quite a lot of other stuff, often I don't put out a different kind of input for every Sunday show, and it's only every now and again I put out all the things with all the links to documents. So it is very helpful and people do appreciate it. So hopefully we'll do more of that and be able to attach some stuff to our forthcoming interviews and put them onto that page. I think it'd be really helpful. Yes.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. We need references, don't we? And resources. Yeah. So yeah, Frank Olson, Ewan Cameron was involved with Frank Olson, William Sargent, who was associated with Richard Asher, Jane Asher's father, interestingly, the Tavistock Institute, which brings us back to McCartney again. William Burroughs was involved in all that dubious stuff with his reverse tape recordings and his magic. He did things with Brian Epstein as well. Burroughs was very anti-Epstein. Lots of people died around then because they were asking questions. Joe Orton in particular died because he was asking too many questions. Portmeirion, as we mentioned before, is quite attached to this story. Prisoner series refers to it. Also, Man in the Suitcase. There was a series called Man in the Suitcase in the 1960s. There are many references. There were many people killed around then. Many people were affected and many were afraid. But if you can get away with the things that they did in the 1960s, then you can definitely get away with what's going on now. And you can probably get away with replacing the entire human population and dispensing with the Human Rights Act, because it won't apply to H+ transhumans anyway, will it? Because this time they're not doing it with LSD and disintegration. They're doing it with AI and lockstep on the removal of the useless eaters.
Yes. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be going into over the next several months, trying to put together some of this stuff which has been buried, which seems very fragmented to a lot of people. We're going to focus in on certain aspects of it and do some interesting shows. And the whole idea of this is that it gives people an idea of the bigger picture of social engineering, which is now seen as... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, yeah. This has been, it's not just something they've started doing now. This is what's happening now has been planned for a very, very, very long time. And you can follow it through. You can follow it through by looking at the documents, and you can see what they've been doing, and you can see how they've been controlling people's perceptions and in various ways. And it's just got stronger and stronger and stronger. And this time it's the AI. They don't actually have any choice. I mean, once you've set it going, like Elon Musk says, you can't really stop it. And you get to a point, like you get to the point when the singularity is approaching, and it's going to just take off on its own. And the AI is just going to do it regardless of what they want. And I think that's what's happening now. I think that they didn't want to do this soon. I think what's happening now should have taken, I mean, you know, you would not be able to get people to do what they've been doing, except over at least a decade, possibly 2 decades of really, really hard work. But the way it's been done with the virus and everything, to keep people apart from each other, to get them used to not doing things, to get them used to doing everything where they can be watched on the computer like we're doing now, right? And get their faces tracked. Because if you want to keep, like with the Pfizer thing, the press release that I was talking about at the beginning, if they're going to do this stuff, if they're going to control the world through greenness, and if they're going to control the world through their climate change stuff, then they're not going to get people to do that willingly. It's going to be really, really hard, and people are going to suffer really, really badly. And so you have to have a good cover story that's going to convince them to do what you want them to do.
There's 2 reasons. There's a real reason, and there's the cover story. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. The real reason is usually buried by the cover story. And there's never been a time in history where that's been more apparent than it is now. COVID-19 and what's happened in the past year, as you were just saying, would have taken 10 years to implement. This is absolutely like a roller coaster, and they're on it. And they can't get off now. And I think that's the point you were making. They can't get off either, because it's now or never for them to do this.
It's been done with the drugs. It's been done with the computers. And it's just banged into people's heads all the time. And they've got to keep away from each other and not talk to each other. They've got to not have any contact. And this is exactly what you want if you're going to have a technocracy. Because if the only reason for having the people is to have their data used by, you know, like Bill Gates patent for his data mining nonsense, that, you know, so that every time you're doing anything, he's mining cryptocurrency on the computer. And if that's all your purpose is, then you may as well get rid of most people.
And well, that's their view, but it's also very problematic because it goes against the natural order of things. So it's never going to work. It can't
Oh,
work.
but that's the worrying thing, because they're selling the tech to kids. You know, everybody's got I haven't got a phone. I've got a clockwork phone. Like, you know, I've still got a little tiny phone with buttons, and I'm not going to have a smartphone. Absolutely no way am I going to have a phone where they can track me about. I'll have the phone with me sometimes, and I'll use it when I need to. But kids are so dependent on them. Everyone is, and then you get sucked into that, and then you have a wearable thing, and then, well, it's not very far from that.
That's not going to work. Well,
then,
my only point here is that that's not going to work for everyone. It won't work for everyone. So the point is that they're depending on that to happen. I've been covering this for weeks on my shows, probably years, you know, and it's all the stuff we talk about generally. So I don't think we need to reiterate that point too much. But I think that just to finish this off, because we've been going nearly an hour, I'm going to put this out, and it's going to be the actual beginning of looking into a lot of these things that we've thrown around today in a bit of depth. So in other words, it's a good way of introducing some of these subjects which a lot of people find absolutely incomprehensible and impossible. And we're going to be delving into a bit of this stuff because I find a lot of it extremely credible. And the more I learn, the less I know. So I'm always willing to have an open mind and look at whatever is out there. And that is, I think, the unique thing about these shows that we're going to be doing. So some people are going to find it preposterous. Other people will find it interesting. It's basically running along all the stuff that we've been doing for the past 10 years and really longer. So hopefully this is going to be a really interesting series. And thanks a lot for coming on today, Ingrid.
Thank you.